Hi, I'm Raylan Worcester, and this is Spreading the Word. That's word with a capital W, as in the written word, the Bible, and the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. I'm about to read to you part 5 of And Then the Trumpet, the exciting sequel to Without Faith. When we left off, a tribunal had been held for all of those who were accused of torture and war crimes and treason. And the results are in. So we are about to find out what is going to happen to all of the perpetrators of these crimes. Here we go. And then the trumpet. Throughout the nation, alarms were set for earlier than usual. No one wanted to miss the early morning segment of Now News New America. Every table and stool at the counter were filled at Heavenly Coffee. There were people standing shoulder to shoulder, trying not to spill their coffees, in front of the screen above the counter 20 minutes before the segment started. Finally, the moment the entire nation had been waiting for. Good morning, New America. This is J.T. Hadlock with all the now news in the nation. The moment you've been waiting for. The tribunal results are in. President Russ Naylor, Vice President Jackie Naylor, head of the Joint Chiefs of the Militia General Hsing, and the Supreme General of the Militia of New America have all been found guilty of high treason against New America and of war crimes against its citizens. Each charge has earned them a life sentence. They have been remanded to ADX Florence in Colorado, the only supermax prison in New America, to serve their sentences consecutively. They are currently being held in a federal detention cell and will be transferred to Colorado tomorrow. JT paused, supposedly to take a sip of his coffee, but more for dramatic effect, and to allow those watching a few moments to celebrate. He continued, "For those of you unfamiliar with the ADX, this prison has been called a clean version of hell due to its harsh conditions. It's not a dentist chair or a guillotine, but it's as close as we will get, folks." Trials are still underway throughout the nation for all detained by the resistance in the camp raids to determine what level of responsibility and complicity each was involved in. They will likely continue for the next few months. I have been informed, however, that Edmund Billings, the director of Camp Bouse, and those who performed the actual torture on the little island at Fort Savage have been tried, found guilty of war crimes, and have also been sentenced to life at the ADX. Just a reminder that next Tuesday, August 1st, is the National Day of Mourning, and all businesses will be closed. If you're needing to hold a funeral, be sure you do it on that day so the government will pay for it. If you've already had one for a loved one who died in the camps, submit your receipt to your governor before Tuesday for reimbursement. Also, don't forget that the presidential election is just over 2 weeks away. Be sure to get your nomination sent to your governor right away. "Y'all know who I'm nominating," JT said with his charming smile, "but I figure anyone would be an improvement, am I right?" To wrap up this segment, I would just like to observe a moment of silence. Gratitude for the resistance and its leader, for those who put their lives on the line to rescue our loved ones from the camps. Thanksgiving for those who returned home. Acknowledgement of the sacrifice of those who did not. On Tuesday, we mourn. Wednesday, we heal and start afresh. Bow your head with me if you would. Every head watching the broadcast bowed and thanked or remembered someone. After a few moments, JT raised his head, looked into the camera, and softly said, "For Now News New America, this is JT Hadlock. JT out." No one wanted to leave Heavenly Coffee. Strangers who were sitting offered their seats to those who had been standing. All ordered more coffee. Everyone shared stories about their loved ones' experiences at the camps, what the homecomings had been like, how they discovered their loved ones wouldn't be returning. They talked about funeral plans and where they would go from there. They discussed the tribunal results and who they thought the next president should be. There was only one name mentioned. Sometime before noon, the crowd started to dissipate, reluctantly leaving the spontaneous camaraderie to resume their individual lives. When the last patron left, Christian put the closed sign on the door. Next to it was another handwritten post. It said they would be closed for 2 weeks while the owners were away on their honeymoon. They would reopen it on the 14th. No sooner had the segment ended and Gloria was dialing Sam. "Congratulations, Sam," she said when he answered the phone. "You've got to be happy with those results." "They got what they deserved," Sam agreed. "But why do I think that's not why you called?" Gloria was silent a moment, suddenly unsure how to proceed. "Let me guess," Sam said, filling in the awkward silence. "This is about the general. You worked very closely with him for over a year. I still don't know how someone as tender-hearted as you could convince him you were in his camp. It had to be difficult. Did he ever suspect you?" "I don't think so," she replied. "I need to see him, Sam. I need to explain. I owe him that. If he hadn't made me his personal liaison, I couldn't have gathered the evidence that enabled your resistors to raid. He leaves for Colorado tomorrow. Is there any way—" "Let me make a phone call. I think my name holds a little sway right now," he said with a chuckle. "I'll call you right back." Sam called back 10 minutes later. "If you can get a flight out right away, Speaker Lee will allow a visit before 9 p.m. tonight. Also, I had a call from Jeb Bingham in Indianapolis. Do you know him?" "Yes. How do you know Jeb?" "He was a section leader with the resistance. He said to tell you that Eric Greenbaugh's trial was today. He said you worked closely with him at Fort Benjamin Harrison." "I did. It's complicated, like with the general." Sam understood. Eric was charged with conspiracy to commit a felony for creating conditioning earbuds, inciting hatred, and compelling others to act outside the law. He was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security prison and is eligible for parole in 2.5 years. Gloria took a deep breath, allowing the information to register. "Thank you, Sam, for the information, for arranging the visit with the general, well, for everything." "My pleasure, Gloria. You better get to making those flight arrangements. I'll talk to you soon." Connie Greenbaugh sat in a threadbare armchair in her South Side of Chicago tenement building with her head in her hands. It had come to this? How had it come to this? The president, vice president, and Teddy, her Teddy, had been sentenced to life in prison for treason and war crimes. It had to be a mistake. Connie had been 8, and Theodore Madison was 12 on that fateful day at the Cook County South Side Orphanage. One of the older boys had lured Connie outside to a dark corner of the building, partially obscured by bushes, with the promise of seeing newborn kittens he had found under the house. She was on her hands and knees looking into the dark space beneath the house, caused by the washing away of the ground in recent rains, when she was suddenly pushed down flat. A heavy weight on her back crushed her into the ground, and her mouth filled with dirt when she tried to cry out. She kicked wildly and made muffled cries as the boy lying on top of her reached under her dress and started to roughly yank down her panties. Suddenly, her dress tore, and the yanking stopped as the weight lifted from her back. She scrambled to her feet, pulled her panties the rest of the way up, spit the dirt out of her mouth, and turned to see another boy, younger but taller than the one who had assaulted her, pummeling her attacker with his fists. "Stop!" she yelled, seeing the bloodied face of the boy, who no longer appeared to be moving. He did stop, and for the first time seemed to notice the little girl with the tear-streaked, dirty face and torn dress. He walked over to her and knelt to look her in the eye. "Are you okay?" he asked. Her eyes welled up again as she shook her head no. He put his arm around her shoulders and held her as she cried. When she was spent, he said, "My name is Theodore." "Teddy. What's your name?" Connie," she said, still sniffling. "Connie, from now on I'm going to take care of you. You're going to be my little sister, and I will always protect you, okay?" She nodded solemnly, then smiled. It melted Teddy's heart. He took Connie's hand and said, "I'm going to be in big trouble for hurting that boy. I'm going to have to leave. Do you want to go with me?" She didn't want to stay at the orphanage where big boys prey on little girls, and Teddy said he'd take care of her. She would be his sister. She nodded, and the two ran away before anyone could find the beaten boy or would even realize they were missing. Teddy and Connie found places to sleep, things to eat. Teddy was smart and resourceful. When there was only enough food for one, he gave it to Connie. She got the sweatshirt he had snagged off a clothesline. When there was room for one under an awning, he slept in the rain. Teddy was the best brother a girl could have. They'd been on the street for a year when a pastor's wife found them at a soup kitchen and begged her husband to take them in. The couple raised them as their own children, gave them a good home, and put them in school. Teddy's passion was ROTC. It was no surprise that he went into the military immediately after graduation. He almost didn't enlist, torn between his passion and his need to stay and protect his sister. Connie convinced him that she hadn't needed protecting for quite a while, and he could write her often and stay in touch, which he did. She got married right out of high school to the first boy who said he loved her. She later discovered that Carl Greenbaugh only loved how compliant Connie was, what her desperate need to be loved allowed him to do. She was already pregnant with her son Eric when Carl's true colors were shown. He beat her to a pulp when she drew the line at the threesome Carl wanted to have. He left her bleeding on the kitchen floor, where she was later found by a neighbor and taken to the hospital. Teddy came home on a leave to discover Connie living in a tenement building in a rough part of town with her young son. The neighbor who'd found her the day Carl left had taken her to a woman's shelter when she was released from the hospital. They set her up in a cheap, run-down apartment where she was able to take in ironing to support herself and her child. Teddy never forgave himself for not being there to protect Connie from Carl. From that day on, Teddy had never been able to deny Connie anything she asked of him. He went back to his post, determined to rise quickly through the ranks and become successful enough to take care of Connie as she deserved. Teddy was a born leader and rose through the ranks quickly, surprising all his superiors, who, seeing his gift, assisted in his meteoric rise. Connie's little boy, Eric, was a handful from the get-go. His first word was no, and he perfected the art of the temper tantrum. As a terrible two, he got into everything. Connie got used to never having anything nice because Eric broke nearly everything he touched. He seemed to take pleasure in it. She found a measure of peace when Eric was old enough to go to school, but he spent most of his time there in detention for fighting and being mean to the other kids. About the time Eric hit puberty, it became obvious that he was going to be a heartbreaker. He had the good looks and an arrogant kind of bad boy charm that the girls loved. He began sneaking out at nights, drinking and partying at age 13. By age 14, it was rumored he had already fathered 2 children by 2 different girls. He denied it, and no one could prove it, so it remained rumor. He'd been arrested twice by 15 and did a stint in juvie until he was 17. In desperation, Connie reached out to Teddy and begged him to do something with his nephew. He couldn't refuse her. Eric enlisted in the Army and was assigned to his uncle's unit under his command. Every time a promotion was available, Connie would beg Teddy to push her son through, whether he was ready or not. When the processing center and detention camps were being established, Teddy was offered a promotion to Supreme General of the Militia of New America. It was the highest rank he could attain. His only bosses were the President and Vice President of New America. He pulled strings and got Eric, now a colonel, installed at Fort Benjamin Harrison as head of the militia there. Connie had no idea what the jobs her brother and son held entailed. She wasn't aware the posts they were stationed in had anything to do with the domestic terrorists being arrested. Teddy reached out to Connie on a regular basis, but never divulged anything about his or Eric's jobs. Connie hadn't heard from her son since the day he left juvenile hall to join the military. She continued to live alone in the same tenement building where she raised her son, no longer taking in ironing, but living off the universal basic income. Now she sat, head in hands, unable to believe her ears. How could Teddy have been arrested for treason and war crimes? Her Teddy, her hard-working, honorable, knight in shining armor. It just didn't make sense. Now, if Eric were accused of such a thing, she wouldn't be surprised. Her next thought was almost an afterthought. Was Eric working with his uncle? Was he arrested too? She wondered who she could call to find out. Gloria arrived in Washington, D.C. at 7 p.m. Speaker Lee led her to the federal detention building where the general was being held. Sam had explained who Gloria was, and the interim leader of the country hugged her briefly and thanked her for her sacrifice on the nation's behalf before leaving her alone to face the general. Gloria approached the bars behind which the general sat with tears in her eyes. "Gloria," the general said in a wounded voice, "it was you responsible for all of this, wasn't it?" She nodded her head. "But I loved you, General, As much as I despised what you were doing, I ached with every act that betrayed you. As much as I rejoiced over the outcome it would produce, I love you still, and my heart is breaking. Tears rolled unhampered down her cheeks. The housekeeper? The general asked. Part of the plan, sent to encourage the saints at Camp Baus. He shook his head in disbelief. And Colonel Greenbaugh got less than he deserved, she replied, steel in her voice. And me, Gloria? Is there no hope for me? He asked. There is always hope, General. As long as there is breath in your body, you will pay for your crimes, and harshly, but you can still find salvation in Jesus Christ. If you will allow it, I would like to write to you in Colorado and tell you all about it. I'd like that, he said. As she turned to leave, the general called to her one last time. Gloria! Yes, General. I'm proud of you. Gloria made her way out of the jail through vision distorted by a steady stream of tears. Thousands of funerals in every state took place on August 1st, 2034, the National Day of Mourning. They were all closed casket funerals, some containing only the heads of those martyred at Camp Baus, others containing bodies with evidence of torture or just painfully emaciated. Nobody wanted to see inside the caskets. Families who did not receive loved ones returned to them held memorial services on this day and ordered a government-purchased headstone to place in a local cemetery to mark the life of the one they had lost. Most of these were already buried in the 750-acre cemetery at Camp Barkley in a grouped trench marked by plain white posts, bodies nearly impossible to locate and deemed unrecoverable. After the services concluded, churches across the nation remained unlocked, with lights kept on for anyone who wished to pray, mourn, and reminisce in peace. Except for churches and funeral homes, all businesses in the nation closed on this day. Every employee was given the day off. Their companies all closed. Not even a grocery store or restaurant remained open. No one felt much like eating on this day anyway. To his credit, even J.T. Hadlock suspended his transmission of Now News New America, choosing to attend services around D.C. instead. It was a day of sadness and mourning, but also a day of solidarity. For one day since G-Day, the nation came together to honor its fallen loved ones. Strangers who'd lost someone hugged others who were mourning. People who hadn't lost loved ones attended funerals anyway to show support for those who had. The pain was common and shared. Tomorrow, the healing would begin. Like the flip of a light switch, the nation was no longer angry, wanting answers. JT had answered all their questions. The perpetrators were paying for their crimes. Everyone had had enough of hatred, loss, and government overreach. People were no longer interested in forcing others to do anything. They all just wanted to live and let live. Families grew close to each other again. Churches began to fill up. People no longer set alarms to watch Now News New America. but still found themselves in front of their TVs at 6 and 6. There was an upcoming election, and there would be changes coming they would need to stay on top of. In a cruel twist of fate, or an ironic sense of justice, depending upon your viewpoint, those who had been sentenced to life sentences at ADX Florence arrived at the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, via the same repurposed school buses that had shepherded their victims to the cattle cars and the confinements beyond. Each had been bound in ankle fetters and handcuffs attached to chains around their waists. The ankle fetters attached to the metal that anchored the bus seat to the floor. Because all aboard this bus had been held in the same detention facility and many knew each other, these prisoners were also gagged so they could not speak to one another. The bus held armed guards, 2 per prisoner, who would escort them on and off the bus, one holding each arm. Prior to their sentencing, these prisoners were government officials. Most had been pampered, used to ordering things done on their behalf. A president, vice president, militia generals, camp directors. That was then. That was their life. That was no more. Now they would be treated like the traitors and criminals they were. Those whose crimes at their core had been simply making bad decisions and ordering them done, now would be living in the same facility as Ramzi Youssef, who plotted the 1993 bombing at the World Trade Center, and the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski. It was somehow appropriate that they would arrive on August 1st, 2034, the National Day of Mourning. While the nation mourned the losses these had caused, they would now be mourning the loss of their life as they knew it. As each was escorted from the bus, it became clear. ADX, the nation's most secure supermax prison, was built to cut them off from the world. Heavily armed patrols roamed the grounds. A dozen imposing gun towers sat high above the razor-wired walls. Wires were intentionally placed so helicopters couldn't land. As terrifying as he had believed it to be, Edmund Billings now realized that the camp he'd run, Camp Baus, was ADX's little sister by comparison. Jackie, who had been stripped of all his makeup, wigs, and frippery, took one look at his surroundings and began to cry. The Supreme General, who'd been stripped of his rank, was now simply Theodore Madison. He took in the breathtaking beauty of the Rocky Mountains in the backdrop of the prison, painfully aware that he was seeing them for the first and last time. Each prisoner was led to a 7 by 12 foot concrete cell in H block. The cells each had a single window 42 inches high and 4 inches wide that allowed some natural light, but was made so prisoners could not see beyond the building. Each cell had an unmovable stool and desk made of concrete and a concrete slab for a bed, dressed with a thin mattress and blankets. Meals would be slid through a small hole in the door. Solid walls prevented prisoners from seeing other cells or having direct contact with other inmates. The inmates would remain in these cells 23 hours a day. A recreation hour was allowed in an outdoor cage, slightly larger than their cell. Inside the cage, only the sky was visible. To get there, the prisoners were escorted in leg irons, handcuffs, and stomach chains by guards. They passed hundreds of cameras, as the metal doors slid open and closed. This would be the new normal for Rust and Jackie Naylor, Edmund Billings, Hasai Singh, Theodore Madison, and the rest. They would reside in H Block for a minimum of a year, after which they could possibly enter Stage 1 of the prison's step-down program, earning limited privileges, such as receiving books to read or heavily redacted mail. Suicides were common in the ADX, many driven insane by the total isolation. The rest simply wished to die. Those in the nation they'd left behind were not aware of all of this. They simply believed that justice was done and the perpetrators were getting what they deserved. Perhaps they were. Over the next 2 weeks, Gloria acquired all the Bitcoin she needed, used her credits to buy quantities of silver and gold, bought buildings and yards in cities across the country, and set up those she trusted to run her businesses. She instituted nonprofits called Relief for the Rescued in Indianapolis, Indiana, and in Tucson, Arizona. Dylan would run the one in Indianapolis and Rob the one in Tucson. The official grand opening for both would be September 1st. She had all the vehicles she'd purchased moved to acres of land purchased and fenced off in 4 locations: Nevada, South Dakota, Alabama, and Pennsylvania. She built offices on the properties and named them Rescued Rides. She got lists of candidates for office managers and salespeople from Sam's database. Vehicles were still illegal, and though no one said anything to the few operating them now, she thought it prudent not to open her dealerships until the law had been changed. These were scheduled to open November 1st. Christian and Bridget Sicarius soaked up the sun in St. Lucia. They swam in the ocean, lounged on the beach, and made love under the stars. They reveled in each other and in the solitude that came from being half a world away from home, away from the trials and funerals and the stress and drama of the last year. They did discuss Sam's offer over Mai Tais. As perfect as the honeymoon was, it wasn't the kind of life that either wanted. They needed to be vital. They needed to be involved. They needed to make a difference in the world around them. This past year had shown them that. There was no decision to make. The coffee shop, as enjoyable as it was a stepping stone, a means to an end. It had served its purpose, played its part in the revolution. They would lease it out. Christian made a brief call to Sam to let him know they were on board. When they went home, everything would be different. They would be starting a new, exciting chapter in their lives. For now, the couple decided they'd best enjoy the peace and quiet while they could. They snuggled under a blanket, leaned against a palm tree on the white sand, and watched the sun set over the ocean. Christian reflected as he sat with his arms around his wife, her back molded to his chest, on how far the two had come this past year. She went from being a cute White House intern who frequented his coffee shop to the love of his life. Their months spent in the secret room behind the storage room taught them all they needed to know about each other, built a deep friendship and trust. It made them both realize what life would be like without the other, something neither wanted to contemplate. Christian's insistence on abstinence during their relationship had paid off in spades. They had their first kiss the day he proposed and made love for the first time on their wedding night. Intimacy delayed made this honeymoon all the more special and united them in a way they never thought possible. They truly felt like one. Bridget snuggled into his shoulder a bit as the last of the sun disappeared over the horizon. The air began to cool, and Christian tightened his arms around his wife. This is how they would handle everything that came their way, the couple silently vowed. Together. Before anyone knew it, it was Tuesday, August 15th, 2034, Election Day. Congressmen sat opening folded papers from the stacks in front of them and reading aloud the name thereon. Samuel Adamson. Sam Adamson. Sam Adamson. Sam Adamson. Samuel Adamson. Sam Adamson, another congressperson read in a bored tone. This had been going on for over an hour. Okay, Speaker Lee said, how about you open each paper and read it to yourself and only speak the name out loud if it is someone other than Samuel Adamson. There were nods of heads and murmurs of agreement. 4 more hours passed. No one said a word. He let the phone ring twice. He didn't want to seem too eager or like he'd been waiting by the phone, which of course he and Catherine had. Adamson residence, Sam speaking. Please hold for the Speaker of the House, Wilma Lee, the voice on the other end said. After a moment, the speaker came on the line. Hello, Sam. I'll come right to the point. You have been unanimously voted President of New America. There was not one other name submitted. Sam sat in stunned silence for a moment. He had expected to win. He hadn't expected no opposition. Promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another, the spirit inside him confirmed. So, the first order of business is to ask you if you will accept the position of President of New America, and if so, are you ready to announce your choice for Vice President? The speaker continued, all business. Sam matched her serious tone as he responded, I would be honored to be the next President of New America, Madam Speaker. I would like to announce Christian Zacharias of Washington, D.C. as my choice for Vice President. Very good, the speaker said, letting out the breath she'd been subconsciously holding. A small part of her worried Sam wouldn't want the position, and they'd have to start the process over with no viable candidates. She was relieved. Everything she knew about Sam told her he would make a good president and would have the nation's best interests in mind as he served. Normally, there is a 70 to 80-day transition period between the day a person is elected and the day they are inaugurated to allow for a peaceful transition of power. And so the outgoing president can wrap things up. Obviously, our circumstances are different. How much time would you need to wrap up life in Arizona, move to Washington, D.C., and be prepared to become our new president? Sam glanced at Catherine, who had been listening to the whole exchange over speakerphone and was now holding a calendar. I'll have to check with Christian, of course, but I understand we are on an abbreviated timetable. I think we could be ready to be sworn in on October 1st. 45 days should be sufficient to wrap up all our loose ends. That will be acceptable. Thank you, the speaker agreed. Can you and your wife and your choice for VP and his wife be in D.C. tomorrow for an appearance on Now News New America for the announcement to the nation? We can make that happen. You will need to be prepared to answer questions about your vision for the nation and how you plan to restore it. Not a problem, Sam said confidently. It's all I've thought about for the last year. Yes, we've got the right man for the job, Wilma thought. Great, she said. Let me know when your plane lands. I'll have a limo meet you at the airport. She disconnected the call and for the first time since President Naylor's arrest, felt herself relax. Woohoo! Catherine exclaimed as Sam picked her up and swung her around. She opened the bottle of champagne she had waiting on ice and poured it into 2 flutes and handed one to Sam. Congratulations, Mr. President. Mrs. President, he said, clinking her glass. I've got to call Christian, Sam said, draining his glass and setting it on the table. I've got to pack, Catherine said, refilling hers and taking it into the bedroom. Christian was not at the coffee shop. They'd gotten back from St. Lucia yesterday, and Bridget's first order of business was to call Alicia, her barista. She shared that she was back from her honeymoon, but she would need a few extra days off and wondered if Alicia could open and run the coffee shop for a couple of days in her absence. She knew the coffee shop would be crowded today and tomorrow as people gathered around the big screen to watch Now News New America for news of the election. Alicia readily agreed. She'd loved working at the coffee shop. She would spend every minute there if she could. Alicia went in early this morning, removed the closed for honeymoon sign, and got the coffee machines going. Christian and Bridget intended to stay home and sleep in, then unpack the bags from their trip after a leisurely breakfast. They found they were both too excited to sleep very much and too nervous to do anything but sit by the phone and wait for Sam's call. The call came at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Christian Zacharias, please stand by for the President of New America, Catherine said with a giggle and handed the phone to Sam. Hi, Christian, Sam said. Wow, Christian exclaimed. You actually did it. You've been elected President of New America? By a vote or two, Sam said modestly. And that makes you, my friend, the next Vice President of New America. Are you ready for that? Christian grinned. More than ready. When is the announcement? We and our wives need to be at the Now News New America office in the One Freedom Plaza building at 5 a.m. tomorrow for a live announcement on the 6 a.m. segment of JT's show. Catherine and I are flying into D.C. tonight, and Speaker Lee is going to have a limo waiting to take us to Blair House to stay while we are in town. Christian, like most D.C. residents, was familiar with Blair House. Located across from the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, it was considered the president's guest house. It was where visiting dignitaries and royalty stayed. It was the temporary home of president-elects and their families since the time of Harry and Bess Truman. How excited Bridget would be to visit Sam and Catherine there. Everything was going to be exciting for them now, he realized. Speaker Lee will be sending a limo to pick you and Bridget up tomorrow morning to take you to the studio. It will arrive at 4:40 a.m., so you will need to be ready early. You will both need appropriate attire for tomorrow, so I suggest you do some shopping today. We will be sworn in on Sunday, October 1st, 2034. Does that give you enough time to make arrangements for the coffee shop and to settle your affairs? sworn into the second highest office in the land on the Lord's Day. What could be more perfect? We will be ready, he told Sam. Okay then, we'll see you in the morning. And Christian, I couldn't be prouder to have anyone by my side than you, and I am excited for the things we will be able to do for this country. Me too, Sam. See you tomorrow, he said as he hung up. Immediately after hanging up with Samuel Adamson, Speaker Lee called J.T. Hadlock. Now News New America, J.T. Hadlock speaking. J.T., it's Speaker Lee. Ma'am, I've been waiting for your call. Is it official? Have we a new president? We have. Samuel Adamson will be the 50th president of New America. We will have him and his wife, along with his choice for vice president and his wife, as guests on your show tomorrow morning to make the announcement live, if that works for you. Absolutely. And who, may I ask, has Sam chosen as his VP? His name is Christian Zacharias, a D.C. resident. Do you know him? Actually, I think his wife owns the coffee shop I frequent. Heavenly Coffee? The speaker asked. Yeah, J.T. said. Should make for an interesting interview. I can hardly wait. And this is where we are going to end part 5 of And Then the Trumpet. So, coming up in our next segment, we are going to see what happens when the new president and vice president-elect and their wives arrive in Washington, D.C. You won't want to miss it. For now, please like the video and subscribe to the channel and share Without Faith and Then the Trumpet with your friends and family. And in this way, you too can help spread the word. Thank you. God bless.